started. Let me welcome you today to the final synchronous project briefing session of the Spring 2021 CNI Virtual Member Meeting. I'm Cliff Lynch. I'm the Director of CNI, and I will be briefly introducing this session. Let me remind you that we have been making recordings of the sessions from this week of synchronous project briefings, and we will be making those public at the end of the member meeting. Let me also just remind you that we're relying more heavily than in the past on pre-recorded project briefings to supplement and complement the synchronous project briefings. We released all of those at the beginning of the week, and I invite you to have a look through those. I think you'll find a good deal of material of interest. Next week, we'll conclude the spring virtual member meeting with a couple of days of plenary sessions taking place next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I hope to see many of you there. This session is being recorded, as I mentioned, along with all of the other sessions from this spring meeting, and we will be making it subsequently available. A couple of reminders. There is a chat. Please feel free to use that. There is also a Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to pose questions at any point during the presentation, and we'll try to get to them all in a Q&A session towards the end. There is also a closed captioning tool, and please feel free to use that if that's helpful. I think that's all the mechanical things I need to do. So let me introduce our speakers. Kelechi Okere from Elsevier will be chairing the session, and he is joined by Emily McElroy, who is from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and Russell Palmer, who is from GALILEO. This session topic is very timely and fits into a very long-standing focus of interest at CNI, which is the whole issue around authentication, authorization, federated identity, and how that interacts with the use of networked information resources. There's been an awful lot of work that's been going on in this area over the past couple of years. There have been efforts to streamline SAML shibboleth-based authentication through what was first called RA21 and then later recharacterized as seamless access. There has been work on setting up publishers essentially as a role in identity federations. This is a report on one more step in that collection of activity, which I think is particularly timely, since we know that a lot of our IP-based authentication has been under really heavy stress this last year, as many campuses have closed and people are working from anywhere and everywhere. And with that, I will just thank our speakers for taking the time to share their work with us today. Thank you for joining us, and turn it over to Kelechi to lead the discussion. Thanks for being here, and over to you.
All right. Thank you, Cliff, for having us. Again, my name is Kelechi Okere. I work at Elsevier as the Global Director of the Seamless Access Initiative, which we'll talk to you about today. So let me just get to it. So this briefing is designed to talk you through what we've been working on since early last year, before the pandemic hit, on the feasibility of achieving federated access only to Elsevier's products. I'll just give you a brief summary of it, and then we'll go into a panel discussion. First, just as a primer for anyone, just as a refresher to make sure that we are all on the same page. Just to talk about what federated access is. Again, it's an identity-based single sign-on access authentication method built on SAML. It's commonly facilitated by Shibboleth, Open Athens, and other SAML 2.0 based software. And again, with it, credentials persist across campus services like email, learning management systems, courseware, and others. Authorization and privacy settings are commonly handled or controlled by the institution's identity provider, or referred to as IDP. And with it, it allows access to a resource to any device, no matter where the user is, negating the need to go first to the library's homepage to access the resource. And of course, the user authenticates directly, can authenticate directly in the resource. Some of the benefits, as when you read the literature that are pointed to, are possibilities for things like granular usage reporting and greater personalization for users. So greater granular usage reporting for libraries, and greater personalization for the users. What it's not, sometimes there's a fear that federated access is built for tracking user behavior. So I think it's also important to clear that it's just simply a method of authentication to resources. I've always appreciated Roger Schoenfeld's cogent pieces on any given topic, any given topic of the day in our industry. And so I appreciated this readout. You read a lot about federated access lately. So I appreciated this readout from 2016 from the Universal Resource Access Forum, which was hosted by the Copyright Clearance Center. About the forum, Roger says in this piece that IP authentication and the opportunities to move beyond it for licensed e-resources was perhaps the forum's most important theme, right? And the main reasons for that are that, so when it points out to why are the arguments that are being made for moving beyond IP authentication with publishers, the concerns about piracy, the desire to build more seamless access for researchers, and also to build in value and greater personalization, right? So these are some of the things that drive publishers to move beyond IP authentication. For academic librarians, some of it has been poor user experience with IP, especially with off-campus access. And I think the pandemic did a lot to bring sharper relief into this aspect of it for everyone, academic librarians, for publishers, and also for corporate librarians. But here in this piece, he points out that for corporate librarians, some of the reasons for wanting to move beyond IP authentication are the administrative headaches and the workflow deficiencies that comes with IP authentication. So with all of that, Roger mentions in this piece, and also I think as we're being discussed at this forum, that one alternative direction that seems most likely to gain traction is probably the further rollout of SAML-based solutions. So I think, as Cliff mentioned, the RA21 project, which then the implementation of it was, is now seamless access, has been doing a lot to help facilitate the rollout of SAML-based authentication, right? Of course, it's an industry-wide effort to fine-tune federated access to library e-resources by the development of standards. And one of those standards, I think, comes in the form of the entity categories to better support access around which is now being published by ReFeds, the anonymous and pseudonymous categories that hopefully will make it easier, for libraries. So rather than using the RNS, research and scholarship categories of old, that simply sent more information than necessary and personal identifying information, these categories are now designed for library e-resources, for access to authentication to library e-resources. And work in progress, and this is a working group that I'm happy to be a part of, and that is the Seamless Access Working Group looking at contract language toolkit for federated access. So that this way, as libraries negotiate contracts with publishers, there could be sort of a common base of contract language to speak from for trust. So take all of that. It's almost like no conversation, um, lately can happen without the pandemic being inserted into it, and of course this is not an exception, right? So it brings me to ask the question. So I've been focusing on this topic since last year, um, and it goes without saying to ask the question: is the pandemic help accelerate? Is it or will it help to accelerate move to federated access? So, and I think when the changes that the pandemic has brought are studied years from now, right? I think it will be fair to say that probably more than anything else, the pandemic will probably be among the biggest factors to accelerate the move to federated access. I use first this example by Ralph Youngin from ACS. Right? So this is an article in the Scholarly Kitchen from April last year, where before the pandemic, ACS publications had not enabled federated access for a lot of their users. He mentions in the article that maybe about a dozen of the 550 universities that are part of the In Common had been enabled. And once the pandemic hit, that grew to 350 or so. But even before the pandemic, some, kind of a precursor was China, where they then enabled the CARSI Federation out there. And that saw an explosion because of all the people that were off campus accessing resources and couldn't get access, through the normal IP ways. At Elsevier, we saw a similar thing. Once the pandemic hit, what we saw was something like a 40% drop in IP traffic, right? And initially we thought, maybe people are home and they're not doing work, but actually, when we further analyzed that, we saw that people were trying to get to Science Direct. It's just that they weren't being authenticated, right? Because of the clog in traffic, VPN and proxy and all of that. We also saw about 110 or 20% increase in the federated authentication traffic coming to specifically Science Direct. And then the chart on the right, it shows you sort of a steady pace before the pandemic. About on average about 4% share of the traffic to Science Direct, came from federated access. But once the pandemic hit, that just shot up exponentially, right? And that pace has more or less stayed steady. Then you look at another piece in the Scholarly Kitchen by Emily Singley towards the end of the year, right? So talking about why federated access matters, right? And their library's pandemic story. Uh, Before this article, Emily had participated in a webinar that we hosted at Elsevier. And one of the things that she showed was how before the pandemic, the Elsevier resources were the only ones that were set up for federated access, and the other resources weren't. And what they saw was that overall there was about a 45% decrease in usage for the other, overall in e-resource usage, but a 35% increase in the usage of the Elsevier resources. And that was because of the federated access enablement. Um, and then I did a very unscientific sampling of um, this topic. So I chose the ERNL conference, which I attended last year in person. That was the last time I was, in a room with a handful of people. So last year there were two presentations on federated access. One by Ralph Young in introducing seamless access, and then another by librarians from Texas Medical Center Library uh, and one university in Ohio, where they talked about the implementation of Open Athens and moving off IP. And then this year, there were 6 presentations on federated access, right? Which also was for me somewhat of an indication that the topic is gaining interest. So we take all of that, and with Elsevier, of course, we've been tracking these developments. And beginning of last year, or actually December of 2019, the company decided that it was time to investigate the feasibility of federated access as a primary um, authentication method to our resources, and maybe at some point in the future as the only authentication method. Um, so once we set that vision, we thought, how could we get there? And one of the ways of doing that was we thought best to partner with libraries to test that, right? Are there libraries out there that were on their own moving off IP? Um, and what does that involve, right? Or if they haven't yet started to do that, are there libraries that are interested in doing that, that see the necessity in doing that? What does that involve for them to get there on their own, and also in their interactions with us? What's involved in the company making it easier, right? So we started to investigate that, and to really be able to then validate the benefits of broader use of federated access to resources, to then also help us formulate a responsible strategy, and of course publish our findings. So to get started, we thought that we ought to outline some areas that we needed to look at, like user experience. We found out that user experience is not that great um, as users are coming to our platforms. Um, the way to optimizing the configuration, customer support has been more or less has really been built for IP access. So what changes did we need to make to accommodate federated access? Departmental level usage reporting. Could we build that and make that a service to libraries? Security, and then of course privacy. Some of the learnings from this project, we surveyed 27 libraries. The survey was sent to a lot more than that. 27 responded. 300 researchers. We interviewed about 25 librarians. Analyze our own internal systems. Of course, we discovered that this is a non-trivial decision to switch to federated access only. Started to learn that not all vendors offer federated access, so there's a concern there. We also learned that we needed to firm up our own systems and our own business policies around this. We then also enlisted over 15 libraries, among them University of Nebraska Medical Center Library, where Emily works, and the GALILEO Consortium in Georgia, to then just really work in partnership with them to understand better what the implications are, right? Um, some of the things that we've been hearing are that there are some benefits to be gained around streamlined user experience, around security. The idea of I can never say that word. I put it here. Sometimes I can say it, but I can't. Ubiquitous seamless access on all devices, especially when you move to countries where much of the user base are on mobile devices. I had joined the Open Athens Access Lab conference earlier in the week, and there was a presenter from Uganda where he says that about 70% of internet users in the country use the internet on their mobile phones, right? So how do you then begin to serve those kinds of users when we know the trouble of gaining access to mobile phones via IP authentication. So these are some of the things that we started to investigate, and also very seriously investigate granular usage reporting as one of the benefits that can come out of federated access to resources. So thank you for that time to take you through this. I'll now turn to Emily to introduce herself and also to talk about what they're working on at University of Nebraska Medical Center.
Thanks, Kelechi. So I'm Emily McElroy, the Dean of McGoogan Health Sciences Library at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And we often describe the University of Nebraska as one university with 4 distinct campuses: Lincoln, Omaha, Kearney, and the Medical Center. So across the country, medical libraries are either part of a main campus library, fall under or with a health system, or part of their own campus. And so we're the latter, we're an independent. We do work closely with the other University of Nebraska campuses through the University of Nebraska Consortium of Libraries, where we jointly collections, software, and now a shared ILS. Unlike our sister campuses, we do not have as much overlapping content with them because of our specialized programs. I do want to give a little background on our relationship with our clinical partners, because it provides context on why federated access works for us and some of the issues we faced. We are administratively separate from clinical partners, Nebraska Medicine and our Children's Hospital. We have many MOUs around operations with some shared staff, but unless someone has a UNMC appointment, they're not part of our license agreement. So as an example, all of the physicians at Nebraska Medicine or Children's have faculty appointments in our College of Medicine, so they're covered under our licenses. It is different for their nursing, allied health, or pharmacy colleagues who do not have access unless they have a faculty appointment, which isn't as common. Our situation is not unique for many academic sciences libraries. In fact, it has become more complicated for many of us, whether we are part of a main campus library or not, of growing clinical options across regional health systems set up as part of the Affordable Care Act. So that's just a little bit of background on kind of setting the stage for where we're at.
Okay, thank you, Emily. And Russell?
Sure, thank you, Kelechi. GALILEO, we act as Georgia's virtual library, and we provide licensed content to most of the libraries in the state of Georgia via our GALILEO search portal. When I began at GALILEO in 2016, our new leadership, Lucy Harrison, our executive director, and our leadership team began to work on strategic planning. And two of the major findings of our strategic planning in terms of what our surveys and focus groups discovered as things that our community needed and desired were better authentication, and more personalized services. And immediately that led us to take a look at federated access and specifically Open Athens for single sign-on as part of our post-strategic planning goal to improve both of those things or to add those things. We're a consortium with a lot of complexity. We support access to a huge range of electronic resources for libraries from K-12 through large Research One institutions. And we also manage discovery across multiple platforms with Alma Primo and the EBSCO Discovery Service. And then we have a plethora of different systems out there. So a lot of our work is tied to making things work properly across a lot of different lines. We work a lot with interoperability of systems, and we work to and part of our work with Elsevier has been working to improve the performance of Elsevier products in the federated environment on the support side, and that's been a very valuable relationship with us. But overall, we, in terms of IP access on campus and elsewhere, that'll be a slow process for us. We'll still have proxy servers for some years to come, but we have had several campuses that wanted to make that move. One of our R2s certainly was interested in making sure that they could collect data to continue some projects they've been working on, correlating student success with library research. And then we had several other institutions that wanted very much to set up customized access to certain resources in order to save money, particularly when it came to things like some of the health sources, health sciences resources and allied health resources that our libraries have to subscribe to. Being able to use federated access to subscribe for those with the departmental attribute instead of an entire campus was immediately seen as a value of and a win for federated access. So that's a bit about our ongoing project. We're still working to implement all of our institutions. We have our K-12 schools and our public libraries remaining for implementation. And we look forward to continuing the project and moving all of our libraries to federated access.
Great, thank you, Russell. So for Emily, I'm wondering, well, you and I have talked about this, but I think if you don't mind sharing with the audience why your library decided to move to federated access, and what's the impact of that been for, for your patrons?
So we share a campus with Nebraska Medicine, which ended up causing licensing and access issues. And for many years, everything worked fine. Nebraska Medicine was assigned different IP addresses down to the building and floor level. What made things challenging for us is when campus IT changed the way they distribute IP addresses, and they were no longer geographically connected to UNMC or Nebraska Medicine users, intermingling of the shared. So we had to implement changes so that we could remain in compliance with our authorized use and license agreements. Since this happened, our IT services merged. So it added to the chaos, but also to improvements to where we are today. So we started off by changing our easy proxy setup by asking everyone to authenticate on or off campus. And this was a complete and total disaster. Our usage for all resources dropped significantly. We were inundated with complaints from people thinking that we had canceled every journal. And we told people they had to go through our website to access journals. They balked. Actually, they were enraged, would probably be a better description. So within 2 weeks, we had to open access back up. And at this time, campus was not using single sign-on for many things. And we were really in the early days of changing authentication for different campuses. Around the time we began licensing content specifically for our clinical partners that we managed, but they paid for. So we had all these different user populations. We knew that Easy Proxy was not a long-term solution for us. We couldn't rely on an IP-focused solution or make people come to our website. The environment had also changed in that over 2 years, because of the merger of IT, they moved to on-campus authentication for some systems, implemented two-factor authentication for many things, and then also tightened what people could access when connecting remotely. For example, this fall, they've started really limiting who could use the VPN, a VPN. So connecting the library with single sign-on and moving to federated access removed the need of moving everyone through our website. It resolved issues with our clinical partners, which they appreciated because neither one of us could afford adding them to all of our licensed content. But it also improved our network and account security. Throughout the fall, many universities and health systems tightened IT security because of potential cyber attacks. And we've always had security reviews at our university for purchases of new software or cloud services. But IT decided that they wanted to include all library resources, whether new or a renewal in the security review process. And we panicked. It would have led to massive delays and dropped subscriptions around the annual renewal cycle date of January 1st. But we were given an exception for any resources using Open Athens because IT viewed it as a modern, enhanced authentication system that meets their standards. And if we had been using Easy Proxy, I'm not sure we would have received that approval because it wasn't connected with the Campus Active Directory server. So I support their position as someone who dealt with Easy Proxy breaches at another institution. And we made this decision right before the pandemic hit and campus went into remote mode, but we weren't fully implemented until the start of our fall semester. And for us, we have not received any complaints, and we have some very vocal users. This allows them to authenticate and bypass our website. 98, maybe 99% of our collections are available through Open Athens, and we use their proxy version for the vendors who don't offer federated access. But we did go through a long ramp-up process, and what we noticed was that users started authenticating via Open Athens before we turned off IP access via Easy Proxy. So Elsevier is one example where we saw platform usage via Open Athens starting in the spring before we went live in September and turned off that IP access. And this told us that users were finding their way in some significant numbers without any prompting from us.
Great. So how do you now, and this question is also for Russell, you can also answer that. Looking back, right, with the pandemic, how do you evaluate, that decision to have moved to, federated access?
Complete relief. Again, because the access to the VPN system that allowed a lot of people to bypass going through Easy Proxy or going through the library's website, whether on or off campus, our users are on the same journey when accessing content. But just as you mentioned, we also noticed improvement in speed switch to Open Athens from using a proxy server. So the timing could be better for us.
I'll just comment to that by saying that, just echoing Emily's comment about the accessing before we even launched some of our larger libraries. For example, Georgia State University, they were getting thousands of transactions happening via Open Athens before we brought them live on their website. So that is absolutely the case. And even so much so that I've heard of, I think it was, there was a fairly large consortium in Australia that was coming online with Open Athens, and they decided just not to announce it at all and just let users discover it on their own, which I think was a very bold move, but apparently it worked really well. But in any case, no, to your point about, I can echo also some of your thoughts on health sciences libraries. We have several medical libraries here in the state that we support with Open Athens, and we were essentially able to save access in the middle of semester during the pandemic for one of our medical schools who was relying primarily on VPN for access. Their VPN was overtaxed. We had them about 70% implemented on Open Athens in terms of the number of resources activated. And we were able to fast track that implementation and finish it within a couple of weeks and get them up and running on an emergency basis, which was amazing to be able to do. So yes, I think certainly the timing is good in the pandemic. Certainly off-campus access is more the norm at the moment still. Even with our universities having returned to campus, a lot of the faculty members are still teaching online only. and it has really been a benefit to those users, both as Emily mentioned, in terms of speed of access, consistency of access, and usability.
And for you, and Russell, for Galileo, given the scale of the project, right? I'm wondering, was it easy to get it funded, or how did that happen, or was it a difficult thing to make the business case to get that funded on a statewide basis?
Sure. Funding for the Open Athens project wasn't too challenging for us to come by consortially, because we were taking on the responsibility for authentication for the entire consortium, and ultimately we'd be saving our institutions on easy proxy subscriptions. So that was going to, I mean, we still haven't realized full value of that, but that certainly was a consideration when we went into this. We were going to be paying for one authentication pathway or the other, and federated authentication was much more appealing to us going forward than re-upping with easy proxy and IP access. We substantially vetted the product with both Galileo technical staff and the university system technical staff. We presented the idea of Galileo to our governance. We have two very substantial governance groups within Galileo. Our steering committee, which is composed of representation from our 7 sub-consortia, and our Regents Academic Committee on Libraries. And they gave this project their full endorsement, and our Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs approved the measure. We did do an RFP for authentication services, and because of the unique nature and some of the added features that Open Athens offered over and above what we'd be able to get from Easy Proxy at the time, and then also the more secure environment, we were able to do that RFP as single source, and then the purchase was made with relative ease.
So there's a question in the Q&A that says, can you describe in general how those federated access actually work? IP and easy proxy, I understand. Can you compare with the backend and the user experience with federated access? So either of you care to take this? I can also give it a shot.
I'll take a stab at it. In simplest terms, essentially, the way the Open Athens works, I'll start by removing one of the misconceptions. A lot of our vendors do offer a federated option, but many still only offer the proxied option. Both work in the Open Athens environment, and there is no difference to the end user in terms of how the resource works. Essentially, we contact the vendor and set up the resource to work with federated access. If it's proxied, we contact Open Athens to set it up in their managed proxy. And essentially what we do is on the library end, a link has to be updated to contain the Open Athens redirector prefix. And at that point, it routes the transaction through the local identity provider for the institution. And let me take a step back as I sort of missed a step. The first step in setting up an Open Athens implementation is working with campus IT to set up the link between the identity provider and Open Athens. And that is actually pretty minimal work with the IT department. We've had good and enthusiastic responses there. But once that is set up, the connection to the local identity provider for logging in is facilitated by that redirector link that essentially acts like a proxy prefix. They're not a one-to-one, but they're very similar in terms of how they work.
And I would just add that for us, it is, as Russell said, I mean, I don't work on the backend system, and what my staff say is that it's a very simple process since we worked with EBSCO to implement the Open Athens. So they did all the heavy lifting of the implementation, and it maybe took 15 minutes for IT to make that switch. Now, if we had gone the shibboleth route, it would have taken a lot more of IT's staff time in terms of setting things up. So I would just kind of add that. And what we have found is that when you're handling something like Easy Proxy for users, there is that issue of IP addresses on campus and IT doesn't tell you, but also there were vendors where users would run into error messages because the platform wasn't to their platform or just the way that it was set up. And sometimes you wouldn't know until users would run into a problem and they were really frustrated. And we don't have those issues anymore with Open Athens. It's just much easier. And so really, if you're on, if I go to any publisher's website that we subscribe to, I will see a drop-down message when I try to read an article, and it asks, what institution I'm part of. And it's just very easy to bounce around then. It's also easier for users that are sharing links to articles with their collaborators. So again, we have a lot of research partnerships across our system, and it's a lot easier for someone at UNMC to share a link to something to our colleague at the Lincoln campus without having to include that whole easy proxy string or anything like that. I will say though, that one thing that we noticed in our implementation, we didn't think about Canvas. So while we did a lot of communication around, a lot of people in the Canvas system, a lot of faculty members still had URLs that had that easy proxy string. And so students would contact us because they couldn't get into it. And so we didn't think about that when we were implementing this, about how many of those links were actually out there.
As a comment to those things, one of the things that we did to mitigate that issue was we encouraged our institutions to retain their easy proxy for 1 year so that those links would continue to work for a short term while they still figured all of that out. And we're also working, this is a challenge for us consortially. We're working with our D2L group here at the university system, and we're slowly going through all the institutions and updating all the proxied links in the D2L learning management system environment. So we tried our best to make this a concierge level service, since we're doing this as a consortium, and there are all of those challenges and all those links to find. But that's absolutely true, Emily. It's finding all those links and getting them updated does take a minute, and it can be a challenge. So again, we just encourage people to leave their proxy in place for a year after implementation so that we can help them to find and replace those links.
So Russell, we've had some conversations about these smaller schools in Georgia, right? That when you started this project, there were some of those smaller schools that without robust IT resources, which then means that in terms of access to e-resources, the implications of that for them, varied. How has the Open Athens, project helped them with access equity? Can you also touch on that?
Sure. So we do, as mentioned, we do serve our smaller state colleges, our technical colleges, a lot of very small private colleges, and ultimately our K-12 schools. And some of our schools do have very limited IT infrastructure, and maintaining access to local resources and managing a local proxy server were outside the scope of IT departments. They didn't fully understand how the proxy environment worked in the library world. And oftentimes those tasks were falling to librarians who had 5 or 6 other things on their plate with very little time in the day to manage a local proxy. And it often took them away from other important tasks. So by centrally managing the authentication option, and we do manage their GALILEO central resources, what we purchase for them, and their local resources, their locally purchased items, access management becomes a shared task, and it's a lot easier to manage, as Emily pointed out, in the Open Athens environment. And more of that task falls to us to administer in many cases. We're working to get everybody kind of more trained to use the easier processes on the Open Athens side to administer resources there. But as far as access equity, as I mentioned, budgets have been limited. We had a 14% budget cut across the university system this year. All of our institutions, university system and otherwise, have also had budget cuts. So part of the equity piece is we've been able to give some of our libraries the ability to purchase a resource for a more limited subset of their users. And we're talking about those expensive resources like health sciences, allied health, and video resources is another big one. We've had a lot of growth in video resources, and some of our institutions have gotten nursing specific packages, for example, in our technical colleges, and being able to license those for a smaller group has kept them from having to drop them. So having an option to limit the license and thus the expense to a specific department or student population has proven advantageous for some schools in this situation.
Yeah, and I think also this is an area that we're looking at as well. The ability for libraries in cases like that you mentioned to license resources for a narrower population. There's always been those cases where you say, okay, there's this resource that is fits for certain populations on a campus, but because of the IP wide level of access that we currently have right now, the library cannot afford to pay for the entire campus when not the entire campus is going to be using that resource. So we're also looking at that, the possibility of then licensing for much smaller use cases, much smaller user groups, to then be able to get people access where it's most needed. There's a question in the Q&A that says, if SAML 2 base access occurs through an IDP managed by campus IT, such as Azure AD, do library IT staff and reference librarians still have a role in troubleshooting access to electronic resources?
In our case, yes and yes. We often have any issues that are being experienced with access are surfaced by our librarians. Our support is open, and anyone can submit support to get to Galileo. So we do discover issues both from librarians and end users. Campus IT, certainly, that's been a great part of this project, because we've really had an opportunity to engage with campus IT. They are more aware of us now, and this has helped us out in several areas. Obviously, the troubleshooting piece, when something is wrong, and obviously it's a local issue. Not only is it impacting, if it's IDP related, not only is it impacting access to Galileo, it may well be impacting access to the learning management system and other things. So problems in that IDP environment are discovered more quickly and are addressed by local IT. Also, when things like certificates are changing, across multiple campuses, we have to update multiple systems when that happens, and IT has forged across the university system and beyond. We've forged much tighter connections and better communication around support for those types of updates through this project, which has been amazing.
And I would say the same is true for us. While everything is running through IT in terms of the authentication, we're still managing just regular e-resource issues. Usually they're just user issues that have nothing to do with authentication. If anything, it's probably made it a lot easier in terms of our on-campus users. So we did see all of those questions or concerns drop off, which freed up time. Our volunteer faculty are currently not authenticating through OpenAthn and through the identity server. And so that still get a lot of those questions for us when really still an IT issue. So we're trying to move them to so that they can also use OpenAthn, just so that we can also drop down in terms of the number of requests that we get from them. But I would just say it's been a shift in terms of the type of questions we answer.
Great. So there's so much for us to talk about, but time is running now. I'll ask this question, and then there's a question in the Q&A that I'll pick up after that. With your OpenAthn fully implemented now, and Russell, I know that across Galileo, your members are at various stages of the implementation. Have you, Emily, turned off IP? And with Russell at Galileo, have some of those members turned off IP? And if so, what's been the impact on users overall?
We did turn off IP, and then we just had the recent situation actually with Elsevier, where we noticed that. So, like on our end, we thought IP access is gone. Easy proxy is kind of dead, but the publishers still had some remnants of our IP addresses, and when we purchased or renewed a resource, all of a sudden it reinstituted that IP access. So we had to go through a process with Elsevier saying, no, please just permanently remove our IP information from your website or from your backend systems, so that wouldn't happen again. And it's actually a really good test case just to see if we notice any changes in making that. But otherwise, really in September is when we did cut off easy and IP access.
We have turned it off for probably, I'm guessing about 5 institutions. Of those 5, they're all academic institutions at this point. They have been absolutely fine with it, primarily because they were already requiring a login on campus to access library resources. I mentioned the example before. One of our 2 institutions has an ongoing study where they were using easy proxy logs to correlate access to library resources with student success across different departments using departmental attributes. And they have been able to continue that research more easily within the Open Athens statistics platform. So they have had no problems either with their project and their ongoing monitoring of student success, nor with on-campus access. We have had no complaints from any of the institutions that have chosen to go IP only, with only one anecdote to share on that, where an institution did have complaints. And this was one of our large R1s. They turned off IP access. They let everybody on campus know. But what was discovered is the faculty hated it, because even though Open Athens sets an 8-hour access cookie, that wasn't long enough for some faculty members. They did not like coming back to their desks in the middle of a Google Scholar research session and then discovering that they couldn't automatically or through seamless access quickly access an article through Google Scholar. So that institution wound up turning IP access back on because of those complaints. But other than that, it's been, for those who have turned it off, it has remained off and has not been a problem.
Great. And this will probably be our last question. And of course, we couldn't finish this discussion without a question on privacy. And this question says, would publishers and aggregators have more access to user information and usage? Can you speak to concerns about control of that info and privacy? So I think the 3 of us touch on this, but I'll let you go first.
So, we're always worried about user privacy, and I would say it is on the library in terms of the attributes that you want to share. So we determine what we want to share. Well, first of all, IT tells us what we can use, but then also what we share then with Open Athens. So it really is up to the library. And I would also say, I kind of view it this in a couple of different ways. So I've been in situations, not at UNMC, but another institution, where we received multiple requests from campus asking for data from Easy Proxy on what people had accessed. We refused to share that information. And so using that actually tightened privacy on our end. We don't have those logs. And the only reason we had those logs at that time was because of the ongoing proxy server breaches that we had at that time. So I think that there is that issue where looking at that overall security in terms of something like Easy Proxy versus Open Athens, and we feel that Open Athens is far more secure and helps our users in terms of privacy, but also our work with publishers. The other part related to privacy is considering what vendors, all of our user data, and not just the authentication data, but looking at all the personalized features. So our users love personalized features, whether it's on ScienceDirect, Scopus, or something like UpToDate that we use. And so I think that also needs to be rolled into the conversation on privacy and how data is used. I really look at it as vendors are our partners, along with looking at the organizations that are setting up standards, such as what was released earlier this week. And so I think this is another opportunity for us to work together on joint solutions to make sure that that information is protected.
Absolutely. And just our take on this was early on in the implementation planning process for Open Athens. We began looking at our privacy statement, and that statement was reviewed and approved by both the University System Information Security Group and University System Legal. So we wanted to make sure that our policies were in line with the change in authentication method. The USG IT group as a whole adheres to, which we're a part of, adheres to GDPR principles. As part of our agreement with Open Athens, we comply with GDPR with our authentication setups. So for example, things like statistical reports from within Open Athens are only maintained for a year. And we were just talking about this yesterday, but inactive users are purged after 1 year of inactivity in Open Athens. So you're not really holding on to a lot of unused user data. So GALILEO, in another sense, we do act as a service provider in this environment as well. We have basically a vendor account because we do maintain our portal, and our portal is set up for access via Open Athens. So our users are asking, as Emily mentioned, they want more and more customization and personalization within that GALILEO portal platform. And also our faculty are working with things like Curriculum Builder from EBSCO and are looking for a closer integration of research tools that we offer in that learning management system environment as well. So again, among the benefits of federated access is the ability to authenticate and recognize specific users and give them the option. And I think that's important. To create those personalized environments. Anything that we create going forward in the GALILEO environment would be an opt-in option. We're aware of our users' privacy needs, and we will only, again, provide those services on an opt-in basis. But the complexities of creating a personalization environment are going to also be a very meticulous challenge for us. We're nowhere near there yet. But we will approach it with great care and a high level of user input and a huge consideration for user privacy. And just as a final thought on that, any vendor that did not provide a clear opt-in option with their personalization would be subject to review from us. If we discover a vendor was using data for dubious purposes beyond personalization, certainly that would be a line in the sand for us. We haven't seen that. It would be a violation of our agreements with our vendors in most cases. And in all likelihood, we don't think that we're having major problems with our users for privacy. So that's our point of view on the GALILEO side with that.
And I'll just add quickly, since we're just winding down, as a publisher, for us, since we embarked on this project, I personally was chairing a group for the past 9 months, just looking at our privacy principles, especially around federated access. And one of the things that has caused us to do is to really examine what we do. And for us, it's a matter of only accepting the information that's necessary or taking information that's necessary to authenticate a user, nothing more. But in general, just to really question and examine more fully, what our policies around user privacy, and making sure that they can be trusted and that they can also be transparent if we are to get libraries accepting this authentication method. So I think that's it. I think Diane wanted to also say something to close us out. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Yes, indeed. Thank you to all our attendees for joining us. And thank you so much to our panelists for a wonderful discussion on a topic that is of great interest to our community, and for the great questions from our audience. I am going to go ahead and close down the public portion of this session. I'll stop the recording, but I will invite any attendees who are still with us, if they'd like to remain on the Zoom. Kelechi, Emily, and Russell have agreed to hang around a little bit longer If you'd like to approach the podium, so to speak, and ask a question, make a comment, have a chat, just raise your hand and I will be happy to enable your microphone. So with that, I'm closing down the live project briefing portion of our meeting for the spring 2021 CNI membership meeting. We will not be having programming on Monday or Tuesday of next week, and we will resume with our plenary sessions on Wednesday. We hope you'll check out some of our recorded sessions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.